Ethan Reed, a dedicated bus driver, never expected that a decision to pull the emergency brake would change his life. For helping a lost boy, he lost his job, was reprimanded by his superiors, and faced an uncertain future. But in that moment of seeming loss, an unexpected call from the governor's office changed everything. It turned out that the boy was no ordinary child, and Ethan's kindness was witnessed by the most powerful person in the state. Ethan's kindness was witnessed by the most powerful person in the state. It turned out that the boy was no ordinary child, and Ethan's kindness was witnessed by the most powerful person in the state. It turned out that the boy was no ordinary child, and Ethan's kindness was witnessed by the most powerful person in the state. And a small moment of kindness can lead to unexpectedly big changes. Welcome to Kindness Stories, where small actions can make big changes. Today we're going to explore a heartwarming story about kindness, courage, and unexpected surprises. Listen closely because one small decision by this bus driver changed his world forever. Ethan Reed, 35, is a bus driver with 7 years of experience working for Metroline City Transportation Company. He is a calm, hardworking, and principled man. Ethan's life is not rich, but he always tries to fulfill his responsibilities as a husband and father. He lives with his wife Sophie and their little daughter Emma, 5 years old. They rent a small but cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood of the city. Ethan's days follow a familiar pattern. Wake up early, eat breakfast with his family, kiss his daughter on the forehead, and head off to work. Ethan's bus schedule is tight, every minute strictly monitored. Metroline is notorious for its strict adherence to time regulations, and any delay can result in a reprimand or fine. Today was another such day, but there was something strange in the air. The radio announced traffic jams on several major routes, which made Ethan feel pressured from the moment he stepped onto the bus. He sat in the driver's seat, sighed, and pressed the start button. At that moment, passengers began to board. Some greeted him, others were glued to their phones or wearing headphones as usual. Everything was going fine until Ethan turned onto Grant Street. The street was notoriously busy in the mornings, and today was no exception. As the car slowly rolled through the intersection, Ethan's eyes caught a strange sight on the sidewalk. A boy of about 7 years old, wearing a red jacket, was standing alone on the side of the road, his face wet with tears. Ethan only glanced at him at first, but an indescribable feeling rose in his heart. He looked back. The boy was alone, standing against a street lamp and turning his head left and right, as if looking for someone. The boy was sobbing and sobbing, his eyes red. Ethan felt a pang of unease. He quickly glanced in the rearview mirror, but none of the passengers had noticed the scene. He knew the company's rules: don't stop outside of an official stop unless it was an emergency. But was a lost child considered an emergency? He gripped the wheel, staring at the boy. Can't ignore, he thought. Ethan exhaled, turned on his hazard lights, slowed the car, and stopped. The screech of brakes was soft, but enough to make a few passengers turn to look. Idly, he said. Ethan stood up from the driver's seat, opened the front door, and stepped out. Several passengers looked up at him. Some sighed in disappointment. After Jay picked the last one up, he started up the front steps and opened the doors to the deck above. "What's going on, driver?" a man in a suit asked loudly, frowning. "Just a minute, I need to check something," Ethan said quickly, and walked quickly to the boy. "Hey, kid, are you okay?" Ethan knelt down, looking the boy straight in the eyes. The boy jumped back, looking at Ethan with fear, but perhaps because his voice was gentle, he hesitatedly replied, I couldn't find my mother." "Why?" "Do you know where your mother is? Do you remember her phone number?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with patience. The boy shook his head, tears streaming down his face. I went to buy ice cream with my mom, but she told me to wait here, and then she never came back." Ethan looked around, seeing no adults looking for the missing child. He glanced at the bus where the passengers were waiting. A few were starting to look uncomfortable. "Do you want to come in and warm up? It's not as cold in here as it is out here." Ethan smiled, trying to comfort the boy. The boy hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Ethan gently took his hand and led him to the car. A few hours later, Ethan's shift ended. Before he could leave the garage, he received a call from Mr. Coleman, the Metro Line area manager. "Reed, come to my office now." Coleman's voice came over the intercom. Ethan felt nervous. Still, he headed straight to the manager's office. Mr. Coleman, a man in his 50s, known for his rigidity, was waiting with a file on his desk. "Ethan? Do you know why I called you in here?" Coleman asked, not bothering to look up. "Probably because of this morning," Ethan replied, straightening his back as if preparing for punishment. "That's right." Coleman closed the file, looking up at Ethan with a stern look. "You violated a safety rule. Buses are not allowed to stop at any non-official stop, except in cases of accident or emergency. Beep, until control system available." "But it's a lost child, Mr. Coleman. He's crying out on the road alone. I can't ignore him," Ethan replied, his voice firm but not harsh. "And I don't care who the boy is." Coleman slammed his fist on the table. "Did you report to the command center? Did you follow procedure?" "Yes, I reported it." "Cobwebs away." "But you still decided to stop on your own. That's a violation." "We don't pay spontaneous heroes." Coleman emphasized each word. Coleman flipped a piece of paper from the folder in front of him and placed it in front of Ethan. "This is your termination, effective immediately." Ethan's heart clenched. "You can't do that. Everything I did was for the child. And all I did was uphold company policy." Coleman interrupted. "Hand over your badge and uniform. You'll get this week's pay, but nothing more." Ethan stood still. Everything seemed to be spinning before his eyes. He left the office with a heavy heart. No more badge, no more job. When he got home, Sophie was sitting on the couch, reading a story to Emma. "Ethan, you're back so early." Sophie was surprised. Ethan didn't answer right away. He sat down next to her, sighing. Sophie realized something was wrong. "What's wrong?" She reached for his hand. Ethan closed his eyes, his voice choked. "I'm fired, Sophie. They said I wasn't following the rules." Sophie paused for a second, then took his hand. "You did the right thing, Ethan. The right thing is never wrong." He looked at his daughter, engrossed in a fairy tale. Ethan thought to himself, "I did the right thing, but who cares?" 3 days had passed since Ethan had been fired. He was still feeling down, despite Sophie's encouragement. Ethan spent most of his time browsing job sites, but nothing matched his bus driving experience. That morning, as Ethan sat at the kitchen table revising his resume, his phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. At first, he didn't want to pick up, but after a few rings, he decided to answer. "Hello, this is Ethan Reed," he said in a slightly hoarse voice. "Hello, Mr. Reed. I'm Laura Grant, Secretary to Governor Samuel Carter. The governor would like to see you today if you can make time." Ethan looked taken aback. "Excuse me, did you say the governor wants to see me?" "Yes, the governor would like to personally meet and thank you for your actions a few days ago." Laura's voice was warm but firm. "We can send a car to pick you up. The governor will be ready to meet you at 2 p.m. in his main office." Ethan was completely confused. "Thanks? For what?" Laura paused for a moment before answering. "The governor's nephew, the boy you helped, is named Liam. That day, the Carter family searched everywhere for him. You were the one who helped him get to safety." A feeling of astonishment filled Ethan's heart. The governor's nephew? Was that boy from that day? Yes, and the governor is very grateful to you. Ethan glanced at his watch. Only a few hours left until the appointment. Yeah, I'll be there, he replied, trying to keep the nervousness out of his voice. The governor's office was in a large administrative building with high stairs and long marble hallways. Ethan was dressed in the best clothes he owned, a white dress shirt and black slacks. His hands were still damp with sweat, and every time he reached into his pockets, he clenched his fists in an effort to calm himself. Laura Grant personally led him into the reception room. Please wait a moment, the governor will be here shortly. We must, called the governor. We must. A few minutes later, Governor Samuel Carter walked in. He was a tall man in his 60s with a warm smile. He was accompanied by a middle-aged woman, the governor's sister and Liam's mother. I am come to report a very promising local result for medicine cures for medical patients, both men and women. Liam frowned. The governor extended his hand to Ethan and said sincerely, "Thank you, Ethan Reed. Thank you for not ignoring my nephew. Without you, I don't know what would happen to my family." Ethan shook his hand, feeling the sincerity in the grip. "I just did what anyone would do," he said modestly. Liam's mother, with tears in her eyes, told Ethan, "You not only saved my son, but you saved me too. I've been blaming myself all these days for letting him go. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart." End of chapter 7. Ethan nodded, not knowing what else to say. After a few minutes of conversation, Governor Carter changed the subject. "Ethan, I know you were fired for your actions. That's unjustified. If Metro Line doesn't recognize your value, then we will." Ethan was speechless, not knowing what the governor was implying. "I'm looking for a safety advisor for the state's new public transportation project. This job requires quick decision-making and a strong sense of responsibility. And I think you're the right person." Ethan was surprised. "I have no experience as a consultant, sir." The governor laughed. "You don't need experience on paper. You've proven yourself through your actions. That's what I need. This job pays better, has more flexible hours, and great benefits." When news of Ethan's honor by Governor Carter hit the news and social media, the story quickly went viral. The hashtag Justice for Ethan trended across social media platforms. Thousands of people criticized Metroline for unjustly firing Ethan. This man saved a child and got fired for it? What a shame. Metroline needs to apologize and reinstate Ethan Reed immediately. Many passengers that day testified that Ethan had acted properly, and they condemned the company for punishing him. An online campaign calling for a boycott of Metroline emerged, and pressure was put on the company to issue a public apology. A week later, as Ethan was sorting through paperwork for his new job, there was a knock on his door. Sophie opened it and saw Liam's mother standing there, holding a small, carefully wrapped box. "This is a gift our family wants to give to you. We don't know how to thank you enough." Sophie took the box and opened it. Inside was a thick envelope containing a check for $20,000. Ethan was stunned. "We can't accept this money." Liam's mother smiled. "You did a good job without expecting anything in return, and that's why we had to do something for you." "My God, and you couldn't do better." Ethan turned to Sophie, her eyes sparkling with emotion. He took a deep breath and nodded. When rewards felt the same way, it could be compelling. As time passed, Ethan's family life gradually stabilized. He officially took a job as a safety consultant for the state's public transportation project. The job not only paid Ethan better, it also gave him more flexibility to spend time with his family. He and Sophie were able to pay off their old debt, put extra money aside for their daughter Emma's preschool tuition, and even save a little money. Ethan took his daughter to the park on the weekend. Little Emma jumped up and down when she saw the fountain, grabbed her father's hand and pulled him along. The weather had cleared up. Dad, come after me." "All right, little girl," Ethan laughed, running after his daughter with a bright smile. Watching the scene, Sophie stood from afar and smiled, her heart filled with happiness. She knew that sometimes kindness can take us to unexpected places. They did, and Sophie left feeling ghostwriter-fi like a river. In the afternoon, the golden sunlight shone through the living room window, creating shimmering streaks of light on the floor. Ethan sat on the sofa, a cup of fragrant coffee in his hand. In front of him was a notebook where he usually wrote down his thoughts every weekend. Once in a while, he'd come to the front. He looked out the window where his wife Sophie was playing tag with their little daughter Emma in the backyard. Her laughter echoed through the house, bringing with it a warm happiness. Ethan leaned back, his head against the seat, his eyes half closed. In the quiet moment, he thought back to the past few weeks. He had gone from being a bus driver who had been fired for stopping to save a child to now being a safety consultant for the state's public transportation project, with a higher salary and more flexible hours. "Who would have thought?" Ethan muttered with a smile. Many times he asked himself, if time could be turned back, would he stop the car to save the boy? The answer was always yes, not because of the job nor because of the reward, simply because it was right. Sometimes kindness is not reciprocated immediately, he told himself. But if you are patient, things will come to you. And then, of course, some helpless people were introduced, including the alien child starring Gregory Heichel. He recalled the moment he knelt down to ask the boy how he was. At that moment, he didn't think about company rules or the risk of disciplinary action. The only thing he thought about was the child's safety. "If I had to do it all over again, I would still do it," he repeated again, this time to himself. Ethan's case quickly became a hot topic on social media and local news. Several reporters contacted Ethan for interviews, but he only agreed to share his experience once. "You regret being fired, Mr. Ethan?" the reporter asked. Ethan paused for a second, his eyes fixed on the camera. "No," he said firmly. "Jobs can be found again. But the opportunity to do the right thing doesn't always come." That response became a featured quote in many articles and clips that went viral on social media. Netizens began sharing Ethan's story as a lesson in dare to do the right thing even if it may cause harm to yourself, and inspired the stories from his limited connection to society to take up the mantle of an education. Articles and posts online received thousands of comments, mostly supportive and admiring. It is the epitome of true kindness. Sometimes life tests you to see if you have the courage to do the right thing. Small actions, big results. Not everyone has the courage to choose right. Metroline should be ashamed of themselves for firing someone like him. There is even a petition on change.org asking Metroline to publicly apologize to Ethan Reed and amend the company's internal regulations to allow drivers to stop in humanitarian cases. But for Ethan, support from the community goes beyond words on social media. It also comes in the form of admiring glances from strangers when he goes shopping or walks down the street. Sometimes someone stops and says, "You're that driver, right? Thank you for doing the right thing." Ethan just smiled and nodded. "I was just doing what anyone should do," he replied. Well, that afternoon, Ethan went with Sophie and Emma to the park near their house. It was Emma's favorite park, with its green swings and spiral slides that she always loved to slide down. "Emma, do you want to play on the swing?" Sophie asked. "I want to go on the slide first," Emma shouted and ran ahead. Ethan laughed. He and Sophie walked slowly behind their little girl. Everything seemed to slow down for a peaceful moment. Ethan felt the warmth of the afternoon sun on his back and his daughter's laughter in the air. He stood still for a moment, looking at Sophie and Emma. Somehow, everything seemed to be falling into place. What he had feared, losing his job, losing his sense of security, had been replaced by a simple, overwhelming happiness. She slid her hands from his. "Thank you," Sophie said. "What are you thinking?" Sophie asked when she saw Ethan standing still. "It's just," Ethan smiled, his eyes still on Emma. "I think that sometimes, when one door closes, another opens. And sometimes, the door that opens is more beautiful than the one that came out." Sophie smiled, her eyes full of love. "You're right. Our window just opened up to a wonderful view." In the distance, Emma was calling out, "Mom and Dad, look at me." She stood at the top of the slide, her hands raised in the air like a hero who had just won a challenge. "Look, Dad, I'm about to slide down." "All right, kid, let's slide," Ethan laughed, raising his hands in a cheering motion. Emma slid down with a laugh, her hair flying in the wind. She ran to Ethan and Sophie, hugging her father's legs. "I did it, Dad. I was brave, weren't I?" Ethan bent down, placed his hands on his daughter's shoulders, and looked her straight in the eyes. "Yes, you are very brave. And don't forget, courage is not just about overcoming fear. Sometimes, courage is doing the right thing, even when no one supports you." Emma didn't understand everything her father said, but she still smiled brightly. To her, her father was always the bravest person. Ethan Reed's life is a testament to the fact that kindness and courage are never in vain. There are times in life when we are forced to choose, take the safe path, or do the right thing. Ethan chose the right thing, and although he faced temporary hardship, he was rewarded with greater good. Ethan's story has inspired many people, reminding them that sometimes rules and regulations are not as important as compassion and responsibility towards people. Dare to do it. Life will have a way of rewarding you in the most unexpected ways. Thank you for watching today's inspiring story on kindnessstories.com. Sometimes kindness is not reciprocated immediately, but it always leaves a mark in the hearts of others. If you also believe that acts of kindness can change the world, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to spread this message. Every moment of kindness can be the beginning of a great story. See you in the next stories where kindness is always the light that lights our journey.